In previous class, we have discussed RDS, right? Redshift. So Redshift RDS we have completed under databases. So whereas Redshift is nothing but a data warehouse. So we have seen some example how to load bulk data to Redshift and make the cluster and make this cluster available to collect the data from different sources. And we have given tried this to configuring in Power BI analytical tool, right? So this is all about a Redshift, and we have seen what is the use cases, why we need to go for Redshift instead of setting up a dedicated data warehousing infrastructure. Now in today's session and the previous session we have seen RDS. So in RDS we have seen MySQL, how to install. MySQL is open source, so we have installed MySQL inside this RDS, and we have seen to connect with MySQL Workbench, so created a table, right? So Redshift is supports SQL plus NoSQL, whereas RDS MySQL is supporting only SQL. Now today's we will discuss about DynamoDB. DynamoDB is purely NoSQL. NoSQL means it's not like there will be no SQL here. It is not only SQL. That's what they say. Otherwise, non-relational distributed database. So first, let's see what is the difference between SQL and NoSQL. So SQL DB are vertically scaled. So I'll write here NoSQL. Okay, NoSQL DB are horizontally scaled. So what do you mean by vertically scaled and what do you mean by horizontally scaled? So vertical scaled in the sense, like say for example, you have it like table structure, so you can insert as many rows as you as possible, but with the same table structure what you have created. Whereas NoSQL means, so there is no limitation of your columns what you have created, so you can insert as many rows as possible for this NoSQL. So and so SQL DB are table based, right? So you need to define your table upfront. So what is your table structure? How many columns will be there? What is the column data structure? So for example, we created employee table, employee ID, employee name, employee date of join, and active status, right? Whereas employee ID is primary key, and we have mentioned it as not null. So SQL database, you need to define the table and table structure. Whereas NoSQL, so you can just create a table, and this table can be of any type, say for example JSON. So any JSON format you can, so there is no limitation that only these columns are inserted into this table. So you can dynamically add column and the data for the particular column as well. So like for example, you can insert the documents inside these ones. So it's basically key value pair or graph based data can be inserted, or wide column stores. Okay, and SQL are best if you know the structure of the DB. So if you know the table structure is fixed, then you can use this one, right? Then SQLs are best. So for example here, if the table structure is, if you don't know the table structure, unstructured data, that's why NoSQL is best suited for unstructured data. Okay, then what are the other differences, like yeah, so these are the major differences. So if you are not aware, like SQL, like for example you have MySQL here, MySQL, Oracle, MariaDB, uh, and for NoSQL you have MongoDB, And from Amazon, we have DynamoDB, or we have DocumentDB as well. DocumentDB in AWS is also called as MongoDB, guys. So these are some of the databases examples. There are other databases like H2.database and other internal database of many organizations are there. So if you are aware what is the major differences between SQL and NoSQL, and what are some of few databases which are in SQL, and what are some of few databases which are in
Harish, sorry to tell you, your voice is suddenly dropped down like anything. Hello?
sorry. Can you hear me, Chandan?
Yeah, now it's proper. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So SQL, so you just be aware of what are the major differences and what are the major databases that you are using with SQL, and what are the major databases that you are using with NoSQL. So now if you are coming for today's session, so today's session will be discussing about DynamoDB, right? So DynamoDB. So if I explain directly what is DynamoDB, I can finish it in 5-10 minutes, but that will not help you, and you will be not understanding how exactly this DynamoDB is going to work. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try to create application. Okay, for this DynamoDB, I'll try to create application like a simple application like either an employee database. Okay, so you need to insert. You have a database here, DB, which is DynamoDB, which we are going to use today, and we will see Lambda function. Okay, and we will see an API gateway. So for this API gateway, if time permits, we will try to create one simple HTML page and integrate this API to this HTML page. Okay, so this is the today's agenda. So we'll create a simple web-based application where we are going to expose some APIs, like for example, get employees, okay, insert employee, or update employee. So let's try to create one or two. If time permits, we'll try to create all the get, put, post, delete methods. Okay, so we will also know what is API gateway in AWS, and what we can cover what is Lambda, and we can cover DynamoDB. So if you do this as a whole as application, you will understand better. Then see, DynamoDB is very simple. You can go and create a table, assign some primary key, which is they call as yeah, primary key will be there, and for the sort key will be there, for which is also sort key similar to foreign key for the primary key, right? So I can tell you can create a table like this. You can insert unstructured data of any type. If I tell like this, so then you will not understand how exactly this DynamoDB will work, what is the advantages of this one. So let us combine this as a whole application, so that we can also cover API gateway and Lambda along with this session. Clear? Okay. Let us see. Let's open DynamoDB here. So before that, let me ask you a few questions. So if you are working on the development, right? So for example, this is our agenda. Let's say, for example, you need to create an employee application. So what are the functionalities is like? You need to insert employee and edit employee details and pull the employee details or get employee details. Okay, so if I ask you, say for example, if you are familiar with Java, you will tell I will develop with Spring Boot and I will use backend as some database with MySQL or Oracle or DynamoDB, whatever you are familiar. And front end for REST API, you are going to expose. On front end, you are going to use Angular, React, or HTML with Ajax or jQuery. So this is the technology tool stack if you're a Java developer. If you're Node developer, Node.js developer, you'll be using Node.js. And for the Node.js, you will use the Express.js web server, and from backend you can use any type of database. So that's what you're going to tell, right? But what are the advantages here when we are creating using this API gateway? So we'll see how much code we can eliminate, and this is also purely serverless. You don't need a server to host your application for what we have discussed, what you're going to create for this one. So let's see first traditionally how you are going to develop, right? So for example, for API, suppose if you want to API, you will use REST controller. So we are discussing in Java. So, okay, REST controller. Then you use Spring Boot or MVC, or you can use some struts or other frameworks as well. Okay, and front end it will be HTML plus Ajax or jQuery or Angular or React. Okay, let's assume for the simple application what we have discussed, right? Suppose if I'm a Java developer, so I prefer to use these tools, these frameworks, and these technologies in order to develop the application which we are going to do today. So, for example, either I will go with HTML, Ajax plus jQuery. So this would be my first option because I no need to configure Angular or React or Vue other things, or I can go with this JSP plus Ajax or jQuery. So this is our front end. Okay, so when you come to the middle layer architecture, right? So I might choose REST controller and with either Spring Boot or Spring MVC, and inside that I need to create a framework architecture, right? So I'll create a controller layer, service layer, and data access layer. So this is the middle layer architecture. And after the after the data access layer, I need to select what type of database I need to use, and you use the DB drivers to connect for the particular database drivers, right? So MySQL, either I can use MySQL, or for our demo, you are going to use DynamoDB. So in order to configure these tools and technological stack, right, how much time will you take? Any developer who can answer this question. So in order to do complete setup, you need to do front end setup, middle layer setup, or back end setup. So minimum at least how much time will you take? At least 2 days to make sure everything is working.
Yes, Harish.
Yeah, so if you are an expert, you can take 2 days. Otherwise, if you are, again, still you need to use some security layers or other things and all to secure your complete application, right? Whereas, what is the advantage of DynamoDB or the other API gateways and Lambda things, right? So we will discuss each one by one. So before that, what I'll do is copy this. Okay, and okay, so let's put like this. Okay, so let's assume this is our database, which is DynamoDB, and this is our API gateway, and this is our let's see if we have time. We will see either to work with UI HTML. Otherwise, we will see some backend tools like Postman or SOAP-AI to check the API which we are going to create. Okay, so here what I'll do. API gateway Lambda. Okay, so here this is DynamoDB, and here it's Lambda, and here it will be API gateway. Here either we'll use REST client or Postman. Okay, now let us discuss one by one here. So first we will see, so this is our traditional technological stack what we are going to develop, right? So which we have discussed now. So now if we want to replace this one with our simple architecture here, backend we are going to use DynamoDB, and we are going to use Lambda instead of writing controller, service layer, data access layer and all. We'll just write a simple Lambda function. We'll see what is Lambda in AWS. And we also have a API gateway. So instead of here in the controller, you configure some Swaggers or open APIs or some REST documents to generate and expose the REST controller or the endpoints to your customers. So we will AWS will provide an API gateway. Here you can ad hoc directly go and create an APIs and expose it to this one. Let's discuss one by one here. Okay, are you clear with this? What is today's agenda? Today's agenda, we are going to create a simple web-based application. So what is the agenda of this web-based application is? So we will be not writing a single line of code here. Why? Because from Lambda you can write your code, but still, since this is a simple employee application, right? So without writing a single line of code, we are going to use AWS services, API gateway, AWS service, Lambda, and the DynamoDB. When we are selecting databases DynamoDB to insert the employee data to DynamoDB. So traditional stack, you know how complex it is and how much time it will require for you to configure all these things. At least minimum 2 days if you're an expert. So here within in our session within 20 minutes, how can we achieve this one? So let us discuss one by one. So DynamoDB, first is DynamoDB, right? So DynamoDB, it is very simple. Like you no need to create any complex table structures, no in other details like you configured for RDS. So it is simple. So go to your DynamoDB here. So click on your DynamoDB. Just give me a second, guys. Yeah. Sorry for that. So this is your DynamoDB console. So in your console you have a create table. So as I told, right? So DynamoDB is an unstructured database. So it will support NoSQL, right? So what is unstructured database? So you don't know. Say for example, you create a table here. Okay. So let me open MySQL as well. So you have created a table in unstructured database. So for example, first when you insert employee details, you inserted employee ID as 1 and employee name as Harish and employee date of birth as something like 12, like this, and employee date of join as 2013, sorry, year of join as 2013, and employee is active. So these are the details what you have for Harish. So for example, you have another employee here. So 2, and let's say employee name is Guru. Now you don't have the date of join for Guru, but you have these 2 details. So you can insert still. But the table, it's not, you can give only one primary key and another key which can relate to this one to uniquely identify the table. That's first requirement. And the other things and all, you can insert any type of data here. Say for example, you have, say, for third employee, it will be these details you have. Okay. So for example, you say, so like this, you have the third employee details. So it's not limited that only these columns you need to enter and these columns you need to enter this column. So when it is a non-structured database, right, you can insert anything. So you can also insert your documents here, files here, JSON formats here. So what, so basically, if say for example Facebook, right, Facebook, lot of posts will be there, pages will be there, many things will be there when you load your Facebook. So if they want to create those many tables and those many columns, it is a hectic for them to manage with the traditional databases like NoSQL, traditional database like MySQL, MySQL, Oracle, and other databases. So whereas for the other, when you are coming to unstructured data, you can directly take the JSON and push it to the table. Whatever the table, say for example, it is a table related to post, right? Doesn't matter how many posts are there in that. It's a single post or double post or multiple posts. We convert into JSON, push that JSON into this table. That simple. This DynamoDB is. So one second. So whereas if you see our, so if you see our traditional database of MySQL and all, so if you can go to delivery QA, so I removed the schema. Okay, as you know, right, because our tables are fixed, so you'll have, say for example, you create a particular columns, ID, name, date of join, and active status. So only that rows you can insert. Say for example, on later point of time, if you come and insert year of join, you don't have a column of year of join here. But if you're trying to insert here, it will throw error. It won't accept because this is structured data. Yeah. So now let's see how to create a table in DynamoDB and insert the details for that. So create a table. Use this option to create your table in DynamoDB. Let's give a table name. I will give table name as employee. And here is the partition key, which acts as a primary key. So you can give your key here like ID. I'll give as ID. And this can be either number or integer. So ID is a number, right? So I'll give number. Sort key is something like a foreign key for this one. Suppose if you cannot identify the row uniquely with this ID, then you can give name of the employee plus employee ID. If you give this both, then you will be able to do. For now, I'll leave it with ID only. And there are some few settings you can, this is self-studies one, you can go and check. If you want to create indexes, you can create index for these tables, other things, but I will leave it for default settings. So I will create a table. Okay, so once you create a table, you can see the details of table. What is your primary partition key, and the sort key we have not provided anything, and these are the other details for this particular tables. Now, suppose if you want to see the data, click on items. Items is, so since the table is just created right now, it is completely empty. There is no data in this table. So we will create this Lambda function and API gateway and push the data from initially from using the REST client. We'll supply some data to API gateway. Then in API gateway, we will have method like post, which is used to push and put, modify the data and get to pull the data. So using these methods, using the client, we will push it to API gateway, and from API gateway we will push to Lambda. In Lambda, we will be writing a Node.js code where this, based on the operation and based on the API called, here we'll be writing create operation, read operation, insert operation, modify operation, and these operations will in turn push the data to DynamoDB. That's today's agenda. So are you clear with DynamoDB? What is DynamoDB? How to create a table inside DynamoDB? Inserting data, we will see now. Okay, and in order to insert this data to, yeah, in order to insert this data to DynamoDB, right? So you need a format like, JSON format. So for example, like this. Say for example, operation. So what type of operation? Is it a create or delete or whatever it is? And payload, can someone say what is payload?
Request structure, Harish.
Yeah, it's a request structure what we are going to insert. Then table name is, we are creating the table name as employee, right? Yeah, employee. And after this one, we have items. Item or items, items. So under items, you have, initially we have kept only one column, which is ID, which is mandatory. So you need to provide this column for sure. And the other columns are mandatory columns, so those are optional columns. So if you are not aware this one, this is a JSON, which is a key value pair. So you will have a key here. And for this key, you will have a value. Say, for example, what is the operation we are going to do? It's a create operation. And payload means, which is a request data, which is, this is the payload structure. Okay. And table name, for which table you are going to push this data. We have created a table as employee, right? Here under DynamoDB. This is the employee table. Okay. And item. So you will call it as data, right? Raw data inside SQL. Here you will call it as items in DynamoDB, and here you can give whatever you require. So for example, name I'm giving, and name DOB. Yeah. So this is closed here, and this should be. Yeah. So this is how you can insert a data to this particular table. Okay. So you have created your table here. Now second one is Lambda. Okay, so what is Lambda in AWS, right? So Lambda is nothing but it will just provide you an user interface. You can use any language, and using that particular language, say for example, it provides Node.js, Java, Python, and .NET other versions. So using these versions, you can write the code and without any server. It is so for example, if you want all these things, so for example, for DB, you need to install some server and install the DB. Then for running this war file or jar file, you need some Tomcat server. To install the Tomcat, we need some EC2 machine. And to deploy this Angular, we need some server to be executed, right? So in order to do all these things, you need infrastructure. But for what is the advantage of Lambda is, so Lambda doesn't require you to deploy any EC2 machines or any other servers. You just write the code, you execute that code, and it will be working, and it will be and also the billing for Lambda is, it will be not charged for the, say for example, for EC2, if you're deploying all these applications, you will be charged whenever the EC2 is running. For the complete time you will be charged. But for Lambda, it will be charged only for the execution time. How much time you execute, for that execution time only they are going to charge you. Okay. So I'll show you Lambda as well here. So Lambda is a service under compute. Okay. Okay. So in Lambda, you can create simple functions. For this function, let us create one function here. And here, if you see here, there are different options while creating a function. Author from scratch means which you can develop from the scratch, and what are the programming languages it allows. So you have .NET 3.1, Go, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, and Java means only 8 version it's selecting supporting right now. Python, you have various versions from low to high, and Node.js and Ruby. All these languages you can write a Java function. Okay, so for now, since we have less time, so I don't want to go and write this code manually through Node.js. So there is a template. So blueprints will be there. So you can select any blueprint, like for example, Python blueprint or other blueprints like this. So I will select here. Let me type as mobile. Yeah, simple mobile background, which means so this will give me a skeleton code to read and write the data to DynamoDB, because our Lambda should insert this into DynamoDB, right? So for this one, we need to write some functions. So when you select Node.js, then you need to write create function, delete function, update function. All this is a time-consuming job. So in order to do eliminate that one, what I'm trying to do is I'll use a skeleton one here. So I'll select that and click on configure. Give the function name. I'll give as employee insert. Okay. And here create a role with basic Lambda permissions. Okay. So when you are executing here, so you select this option, it will automatically create a role with the prefix of this one. Then you can go and give permissions for that role. Otherwise, if it's a basic execution, if you see here, the code is already generated here. Okay. So here you can just give the table name, what table name you need. So that and all we will be managing it from the query itself. If you see here, we already provided table name as employee, right? Then so then you have create operation, read operation, update operation, delete operation, list operation. Echo means whatever you send, it will come back to you. Ping means it will come string response as pong. So these are the default operations which we are passing. So based on the payload data what we send, it will first check for the operation. So for example, the operation is create operation. It will go and it will check the payload. In the payload, based on the details, it will push all the items to the table which we have created here. So this that now the table is empty, right? So it will push that particular data to this particular table. Okay, so that's the basic code here. So for this you need the permissions. For see here you are creating a new role, right? This new role will not have permissions to insert the code to DynamoDB. Okay, so after creating this one, go to the new role, and for that role we need to enable DynamoDB permissions. Okay, so let's create a function. Okay, the function is successfully created. So you can test this function, whether this function will work or not. So for example, so configure test events. So I'll give an event name as insert, and I'll copy this payload here. Format JSON. Okay, so now here, if you see here, insert is there, and if you click on test, right? So access denied exception, because as I told, right, you need to give the role permissions for this one to work. So go to your IAM here. So please feel free to stop me if you are having any queries. Okay. So under roles, select the role here. The role is like, which we created is employee, right? Employee insert role. Select this role and go to the policies. Search for DynamoDB here. DynamoDB full access, and also try to give this execute role, DynamoDB execute role. Attach the policy. Let me check. DynamoDB full access with data pipeline. So enable this option. I guess that should be fine, but enable this option as well. So now you have enabled the permissions, right? So now let us come and test this again. One or more parameters.
Harish, when you came to this page, on top there was something in red color. What was that?
The earlier results were failed, right? Whatever the execution, what you
Uh,
have done, it is failed, right? So that's so. Let
okay.
me complete one end-to-end one flow. Then I'll give again a overview how we have done in detail. So configure test, I guess. Table name missing key required. Okay. So operation we have provided, payload we have provided, table. I guess it is items. Item only. ID is there. Yeah, this should create is there. Yeah. Mismatch key ID expected and actually says. Let sample JSON. Table name item hash key. Yeah, just give me a sec. So we have operation, we have payload. Table name is there. Okay. So we have given the table ID as a number, right? So we are trying to insert string here. So go to your Lambda, go to configure it, test events, remove these quotes here, save this one, execute this test. Yeah. So if you see here, the test has been executed. And if you now, what is the output for this one? We have created a Lambda function. That Lambda function has various operations. So operations like create, where is it? Yeah, operations like create, update, read, delete, list. But in our the test what we have done for the Lambda code what we generated now, we have done for create code. So when you create this code, what is the agenda? It should go and take our input, whatever we are giving in our payload here, it should go and insert this into the database, right? Any queries here? Are you sure? Are you clear with what we are trying to do here? Okay. Now, so we have executed this test case. The test case is success. Now go to your DynamoDB, refresh this table here. So if you see here, the data has been entered into DynamoDB. Now let us do one more test here for our Lambda function. So go to this particular insert, configure test events. Now, earlier we have inserted only the ID is compulsory, you need to insert, right? But whereas name and date of birth is two fields what we have done. Now for this time, since I told DynamoDB is unstructured data, I will add two more rows here. So for example, comma, uh, I will insert date of join. So this organization date of join. So I will tell, so 19, okay. And let me now this time I'll change the ID to 102 and I will save this one and I'll execute this test. So if you see here, this code should push one more record into this one, but there are only three columns: ID, date of birth, and name. Now let's see what happens here. Now the fourth column has also been here with a value of date of join for this particular details. Like that, let me go and put some more some more rows here. I will say employee status is active and BU business unit is financial services. Okay, so I'm adding two more columns here again. So now if I execute this one, what exactly it will happen? So it doesn't matter what is having in the raw data. So the columns based on the request, it can horizontally increase. That's why I told in the beginning of the session when we were discussing about the major difference of NoSQL and MySQL. First difference is NoSQL databases are horizontally scaled. So it doesn't matter. Suppose if you have two pages of JSON file, if you keep the two pages of JSON file here and give the same table name, and if you insert, it will create. So it doesn't reject anything because there is no structure followed here. So that's how DynamoDB work. Are you clear with how the DynamoDB values are inserted here?
So Harish, in this one, the sequence of specifying the fields doesn't matter, right? As it is a key
Doesn't
value
matter.
pair there, right?
Yes. If you see here, now
Okay.
again employee status has came active BU financial services. So that's suppose if you're not changing this unique ID, it will override because I forgot to change the ID here. So it will override the previous record. Okay. So are you clear? Lambda is something like a user interface where you can write your functions and without any, say for example, if you want to do all these things, here you need Eclipse or IntelliJ, and backend you need some database, and with Eclipse or IntelliJ again you need some tools, right? Some IDEs, Maven plugins or other things. Here, if you go to Lambda, you can just copy paste your code, add your dependencies. Suppose if you are working on dependencies, and you can just create a function, put that code inside that function, and you can create test case and you can execute. That's how simple Lambda is for you to execute your code. Okay, so it supports many languages as I showed earlier. So if you have time, so I have taken this one just since we have only 1 hour for demo for the session. So I selected this one, which will readily give the code for us to push with DynamoDB. Okay. So next thing, so now we have done two things. So one, we have completed the DynamoDB, how to create a table. So here, let me write. So how to create table, create primary partition key. Okay, this is done here. So in Lambda, created Node.js code for create. The operations are read. So create, modify, read, list, ping, echo. So these are the default operations which were created. And under API gateway, now we need to create APIs, right? To API to insert the data. So first you need to come, provide the data what we take from the client. We need to give to the API gateway. The data will be pushed to DynamoDB. So like that for create, modify, and read. Let's try to create for first two. Then if time permits, then we'll go for pulling the data. So what are the few commonly used web methods? I mean HTTP methods here in API. Can someone answer?
Yeah, post and get Harish.
Yeah.
Post, get, put, delete.
Yeah. So these are the commonly used methods like post, get, put, delete, update, options, patch. So there the list is going on. So let's limit to here. So get, put, post methods. So these are few REST methods or HTTP methods. So now Amazon is providing API gateway where you can dynamically go through the user interface. You can select what are the web methods that you need to create. Okay. So let us go to API gateway. So API gateway is under services, network and content delivery. Under content delivery, the API gateway is there. So are you following till now? So we have created DynamoDB Lambda. Now we'll create a gateway, API gateway. We'll create a post and put methods and get methods. So after creating these endpoints, we'll deploy these endpoints. So after deploying the endpoints, we will use some REST client and we'll insert the data in order to push to DynamoDB. And we'll refresh this data and we'll check whether the data is correctly pushed to DynamoDB or not. Clear?
Yeah.
So go to API gateway. So if you see here, there are many options here in API gateway. So one is HTTP API, so which is very, very similar to your REST API, and WebSocket API. This suppose if you're working with WebSockets, then you can use this WebSocket API. So then you have REST API and REST API private. So what is the difference? Both are same. There is no UI difference and all. The only thing is if you are creating REST API, you can expose this API endpoints to the external world. Okay. But if you are creating a REST API private, so these endpoints will be only created inside this particular VPC. So you can outside the VPC, you cannot expose these endpoints. So we will select this option, REST API endpoint, so that after when we create the endpoint, I can give that endpoint to you guys as well. So you can also give some data and push it, and let's check whether it will come to DynamoDB or not. Okay. So click on build here. Yeah, okay, thank you. So select REST here, and say for example you already designed your endpoint. So there are okay, let me give very quick overview of how these endpoint documentations are there. What is this Swagger and Open API? So Swagger is nothing but a tool. So earlier what we were doing in 2014s and 2013s, before Swagger and before other things, we have like WADL, right? Web application web application architecture description language. This is so similarly for SOAP, how we have WSDL. So WSDL will give us the interface. Under that particular interface, what are the operations is there? Under each operation, what is the request structure and what is the response structure? This is how WSDL was working, right? Similarly, when REST evolved, there were no proper documentation. So what developers were doing, say for example, you develop an endpoint in Java, then you go and create an Word document or a Excel document. Inside Word document, you will tell what is the endpoint and what are the request address it will accept. what is the response it is going to give, either application JSON or application XML, and sample payload. Like this, developer will create a document, and developer will share this document to testing team to do this one. So in order to develop the code itself, developer needs some time, right? On top of that, developer need to document this very clearly. So all this is a time consuming job. So there were some tools which evolved in market like Visdel, MuleSoft, Swagger, and other formats. So Swagger is one of the more popularly developed tool because of its best thing. Swagger will provide you similar to Visdel. Swagger will provide you JSON file and YAML file. So these two, once you develop, Swagger also will provide some jar files to developers. Developer will add these jar files inside the application. Once you add this jar file, you no need to write any additional coding. So once you just, there will be a simple configuration file, Swagger configuration file. You need to tell what are the controller endpoints it is mapping to. Once you provide the controller endpoints, Swagger itself, because of the in jar file they have written a code. So what this will do, it will look out your REST structure. Let me show you one simple endpoint, how it looks like. Okay, so this is one of your sample endpoint. Okay, let me take this one. Okay, this is one of your sample endpoint. So what this endpoint is having exactly? So this endpoint is having the path. What is the path you are going to call, and what type of method you are going to do? Request, get, or post method. And inside this you have a method. So this method you have model, and model attribute means you have a framework attribute. So automatically Swagger will recognize what is the path, what is the method type, what are the parameters that are getting inside for this method, and what is the return type. Return type is string, right? Like this, the Swagger will automatically detect all the changes, and it will create a JSON file for us. One second. So this Swagger file will create this JSON file. So this JSON file will be given to testing team. So this testing team, you have called user interface called Swagger Hub. When the load in Swagger Hub this JSON file, automatically all the endpoints, what are the endpoints? All those endpoints will be shown, and you can quickly test these endpoints with the payload. The sample payload data also will be automatically created in Swagger Hub. Using, there will be curl commands also. You can use them and you can test this quickly. So Swagger and now Swagger is acquired by Open API. So Swagger or Open API means this is a better way for REST API document. So just keep that in mind. That's the reason I'm telling all this story. So Swagger is nothing but you can first design your, earlier what happens, it was bottom up approach, sorry, bottom up approach. Like first you develop the code. After developing the code, then you develop the visual documents, or the documents like what is the endpoint documents, and then you share the document to other stakeholders or teams. Now you can design your documents initially, how exactly your endpoint should look like. So then based on this documentation, the automatic code will be generated. I mean, this code, whatever you have seeing here, right? This code will be automatically generated and shared with developer. Developer can just write the implementation of that particular code. So that's the difference between Swagger. So now we are not designed any document endpoint, right? So let us go with new API. Let's give the API name as employee insertion. So let's give as employee. So you select this as regional, or you have cutting edge, sorry, edge optimize and private. When you select private, it will become only for that for your VPC. I'll select as regional. Whereas edge optimized is like in, it will be deployed in CloudFront. So in CloudFront, for CloudFront is also one of the service under content delivery. This one. So we will discuss this. I will give overview of what is CloudFront is. So if you select this option. Yeah, now for now you select regional option so that it will be exposed to public. Okay, so now you have created your API, right? You have created your API. So after here, so you will have a blank method. So you need to create your web resources, and then under these resources, you need to create your methods, right? So go to your create a resource here and just give here like I'll just give as ID. So what is primary? Yeah, I'll just give as ID and create a resource. So now I have a resource under ID. So under this particular select this resource, go to actions, create web method, sorry methods, and post method, which is used to insert the data. Okay, you got the post method. Once you got the post method, then you can see this is you are creating a API method. For this, you need to give implementation also, right? Implementation is nothing but integration here. So either we already created a Lambda method for all the 4 operations. So create method we have, update we have. So let's do for that both and check whether it's working or not. So click on Lambda function. Or if you are having a HTTP method, you can write your method and you can give your endpoint for your application endpoint. Or if you are giving mock, randomly it will give you some data. Or if you are using any other AWS service, you can select that. So for now, we have created a Lambda function here. So Lambda function name, yeah, employee insert is the Lambda function name. You are about to give API gateway permissions to invoke your Lambda functions. So just click on OK. Now the integration is happened. So you have you have a request method which is post, and the integration is with Lambda. And one thing guys, so you have 3 AWS services which you are creating here. One is DynamoDB, one is Lambda, and another one is API gateway. So make sure that you generate all the 3 in same region, in Ohio region only. Don't create your DynamoDB in Ohio, then your Lambda in North Virginia, and your API gateway in India. It won't work like that. Okay. So try to keep all the 3 in same region. So you can also configure with using the different agents, but a lot of configurations will be there. So when you are creating the lab, try to follow with the same regions. Okay, post method is done. Let's do one more method. Create method. So to modify, we can use either update or put, since patch or put, right? So I will use put method. Here again, what is the integration for this one? We need to integrate Lambda function. Our Lambda function is employee insert. Click on save. Click on OK. Now, so you have 2 methods developed, but you need to test this method size. So they have provided an option here. Click on test. So here, if you go down, you have a request body, right? In this request body, copy paste. Okay, where is that Lambda? Go to your configure event. So copy paste this payload. Before that, let's delete all the rows in DynamoDB. Delete. Okay, now there are no rows, right? So using this test method, paste the payload here. Let's give it as 100 test. Yeah, if you see here, it is successfully inserted. So now you have developed your endpoint. So you have tested this endpoint is working. Now, in order to expose this endpoint for UI developers or someone, you need to create endpoint, right? Like for example, here you will have your server name, port number, then your application name, then you will have your endpoint name like edit employee, right? So edit employee or something like that. So when you give this endpoint, and then you tell what payloads it will accept, what are the request methods, what is the REST method. If you tell, then UI developer will configure and develop his application accordingly. So here, so to generate endpoint, you need to go and deploy this API first here. So development is done. What we have developed, we have developed 2 endpoints, post method and put method. For both the methods, the implementation we have given as Lambda. Already we have created a Lambda script in Node.js where you are going to do multiple operations. Based on what this Lambda will do, it will take the input as a payload. Once the payload is here, then it will insert into DynamoDB. if you see here, dynamodb.put, dynamodb.get. So if you put means it will push the data to the database. It get means it will get, update means update, delete means delete. So we already written the code in Lambda, and we also have a table of employee. So once we execute the endpoint, that endpoint will come and trigger Lambda function. This Lambda function will take the payload what is there from the endpoint which is triggered, and this data will be pushed to DynamoDB. Are you clear with the flow? So first I'll keep API gateway, second Lambda function, third DynamoDB. So are you clear with the flow what we're trying to do here? Now we have developed two functions, post method and put method. Both the method implementations are done. Now we need to deploy this method. Go to actions, click on deploy API, and okay, you need to select the staging, right? What stage it is. So for example, it is QA, QE. Like for example, QA environment, quality assurance and quality engineering team. So this is the first stage. So deploy. So now we have created a quality engineering stage. So here we can keep multiple variable endpoints. Once it is tested properly, then you can create one more stage, UAT stage. Then after that, you can click production stage. Only production one you can expose to endpoints. QA ones you can expose to your own team. Okay. So now if you see here, once you click on the method, right, under the after the deploy, we have deployed in QA environment. So after the deploy, you got endpoint here. So copy this endpoint. So now, so are you clear with API gateway? So what we have done in API gateway is, so we went to API gateway. There are methods like get, put, post, delete methods, REST methods. If you're not from development background, just go through the documentation and read what are these methods. And traditionally, in order to develop these methods, you need a lot of codes and lot of programming languages to do. But AWS API Gateway, what it is doing, ad hoc you can go and create your endpoints, and you can provide the payload for the particular endpoints. And internally, it allows you to trigger some few AWS services like Lambda and other things, HTTP or your own application as well. So once these endpoints are created, like post method, we have created now. So now it exposed you some endpoint here. So copy this endpoint. So this will be shared with the UI developer. So this is the endpoint. Now we can generate a UI for this one. So either to new page for pushing the employee like that. Since we are running out of time, I'll open Postman and I'll show you from Postman how to push the data to this particular API gateway. From API gateway trigger Lambda, from Lambda it will trigger to DynamoDB. Are you clear? Any questions before we see this test of this lab?
Sure, Harish.
Yeah. So Postman you can directly install, or you can also use simple REST client. Okay. So I already have Postman in my mission. If you don't have Postman, go to your browser, just type here Postman, Chrome. So click on this button and you can add as a plugin. Either extensions can be added or you can download this one. So I already downloaded as an extension. I have launched this app. Okay. So just close this Postman, click on request. So this is how the Postman will look like. So you have the simple methods here. So these are the methods which I was talking about earlier. So majorly we will be using get, push, get, post, put, patch. Patch is also rarely used. Delete. These are the methods which we are going to use. The other methods, when you have a specific requirement, then you are going to use these methods. Okay, but get, push, put, post, and delete, these four methods are important for either for testing or for development for any other things. So okay, first we are doing post, right? So we need to insert some data. So what is the endpoint? So we already copied our endpoint here. Go to endpoint. Okay. So for this one, okay, I will leave the content type as defaults and go to the body, and I'll click on draw, and I'll put the JSON format here. Okay, let's copy this payload from. I'll put this payload here in lab notes. Okay, so I'll copy the same payload and I'll put in the body here. Okay, before that, let us go and check our database. Let's delete these rows. Okay, now there are no rows. So when I try to execute this one, right, the post method. So post method, I have given the operation to create, and the table name is employee, and we have given the details like 100. 100 is the first one. So let's try to execute this one. So if you go to header, so you got a status code of 200, 200 which is HTTP success. Now go to the DynamoDB, refresh the table. So you can see here the data is inserted. Clear? So like that, let us insert one more record. Now we'll remove a couple of records here and insert. So 200 success code. You can see the data inserted again. So let me insert it with a different name and different details. So queries or questions here? So you can insert as many rows as possible. So for example, I will just do sample this. So I'll copy all these rows. I'll just put it here. Okay, so now I have increased my payload, right? Now these are my keys, right? Sort as, gloss, stem, acronym, abbreviation, parameters like this. So when I'm trying to insert these ones, so it should be with okay. So make sure that your payload is in proper structure. To check that, you can check from jsonlink.org. Yeah. So copy paste your JSON here, validate. So you have some error in the line line 6. Okay. So I missed comma here. So this is how you can format and check your things. So click on send. Now if you send 200, now go to your database and check. Refresh. Now you can see your database, the additional columns for the unstructured data which we inserted at the last one, right? So it got created automatically. So are you clear? So let's try to edit this 101. There are two names of with me, right? So I'll edit 101 here. We also done the put method, right? Use put method here. Go to the payload 101. Name I'll keep it. Execute this. So the operation, either it can be edit also. Even create operation will override the same things. So you can go and refresh here. Now 101, it is my with my last name, and the other data is inserted here. So are you clear how to configure this API gateway? Similarly, you can create for get methods and other HTTP methods which I showed here, right? So for other methods you can create and you can try working with this. So questions? Can someone summarize quickly in 2 to 3 minutes what we have done in today's lab? Yeah, Ishwant. Yeah, Namita.
Sorry. We created a Dynamo DB first to start with, Harish.
Yep.
That's a database, basically.
Yeah.
Then we used an existing, like we haven't done the code from scratch for Lambda function, but we tried using like a template or pre-existing thing with functions available. Yeah, blueprint, sorry. And then, I mean, I'm just giving you a quick, there are multiple steps and options in between. Of course, we have gone through. And then we've created this API gateway for these two methods which you have shown, post and
put.
Sorry, what was the other one? Put, yeah.
Yeah.
We tried inserting, like using the Lambda function. We also have seen that, you know, how we can insert data within the Dynamo DB.
Yeah.
We have then tried using Postman, yeah, to insert, I mean, using that endpoint, whatever we have created using this API gateway, we have tried inserting and updating data within DynamoDB.
Yeah. Thanks, Namita.
But I'm sure when we try to set up this, you know, within the lab, we will have queries, or we might not be able to do it in one go. But we'll have to refer your videos and, you know, go through the documentation which you have guided every now and then. But overall, this is what we have done using this, you know, setting up this and then trying to test if it's inserting, updating.
Correct. So we have done only for post and put, right? So you when you're doing the lab, you can also try for get and delete methods as well, so that you will get better understanding. So when you are trying to do the lab, if you're not able to do for get or delete, you can reach out to me. I'll help.
Sure.
Thanks, Namita. Yeah. So any queries from other? Yeah. Okay. So if no queries, anyone can speak for 2 minutes on any AWS topic. Let's forget about batches. So anyone can speak from any batch.